right in a row, and we started up in Center and spent a day or two there. Then, I don't know, I can't remember everywhere. Then we dropped down to Livingston and did a little bit of work yesterday, and now we're here with you all, and Lord willing, go home here in a couple, 3 hours. But it's nice to be here, nice to see y'all, and if you have any questions during the presentation, just feel free to ask. But we appreciate the support that you send the Spanish students. Last Sunday, I was at the Eisenhower congregation in Odessa, and they support the Spanish program as well. And there's not too many congregations that do, but for those who do, we really appreciate them. It's really hard to raise money for the Spanish program for some reason. It's always been in the red since the beginning of the program, and we managed to get by, but it's very needed, as we all know, and we'll talk more about it here in a bit. This thing on? I prefer to walk around with it than stand behind one of those things. But the schools of preaching in America, they exist primarily for three reasons. The first reason is the economics. Right now, room and board at one of our Christian colleges where you could get a Bible degree is going to run you anywhere from about $45,000 to $52,000 a year. So you do that 4 years, come out, you know the math, you're going to owe $160,000, $200,000 if you're doing it all on student loan, of course. And then the student loan companies, they want their money back in 10 years. So they owe $20,000 a year, and their first preaching job's paying them $30,000, $35,000. The math just doesn't add up. So the schools of preaching, economically speaking, we raise our money from congregations like this for our operational funds. And then the students raise their money for their living expenses, and therefore when they graduate, they don't owe anything. And then $35,000 or $40,000 goes a little further when you don't have to pay $20,000, straight to student debt. So the economics are one of the reasons they exist. Also, we're known for our soundness. Unfortunately, as many of you may be aware of, 3 to 4 decades ago, the schools of preaching in the Brotherhood started, let's say it this way, the Christian colleges in the Brotherhood, their Bible department started bending a little bit. And a lot of it had to do with finances, a little bend here and a little bend there. And unfortunately, some of the Bible departments are not what they should be, and they haven't been that way for a few decades. And it's quite unfortunate, but the schools of preaching, typically speaking, we stick to the book. Our training comes from the book. I just finished 2 Corinthians and with my students, and that's one of the most practical books that you can go through for preacher training because there's a lot of practical application that can be made. And I know typically when congregations, I told my students this the other day, I said when congregations sit around and ask, well, what book of the Bible should we go through? No one ever says 2 Corinthians. But it's a great practical book for them. So we use the Bible as a tool for technical training as well. We teach them how to teach, how to preach, how to do visitation, how to go door knocking. We teach them how to, do all these modern things like television and radio and blogging and, everything that's available for young people today to help spread the Word of God. So these are 3 of the reasons why they do exist. Now, our current leadership at the school, it hasn't changed over the last few years, and I'm grateful for that. But Kevin Rhodes is our director. He's been the director of the school for the last 6 years. Pat McIntosh is our academic dean. And Pat, we need a new picture. He's about 6'3", and he weighed, you can see, about 400 pounds there. And he weighs about 190 pounds now. And the work he's put in to do that. So, he's as skinny as I am now, I guess, and grateful for those changes that he made. I think his doctor told him either you do it or, prepare to meet thy God. Well, he's prepared to meet his God. Just, his bags are packed. It's just he prefers not to pick them up and go right now. So we also have Roy Gafford, who is our Dean of Students. And he's been with the school now for about 6.5 years as well. And then we have Willie Alvarenga and Jesus Martinez. They are our full-time staff for the Spanish department. Willie is from El Salvador originally, came up to America in the 80s. So he's fluent, of course, in both languages. And Willie does a lot of writing for the Spanish Brotherhood. The English Brotherhood, we're immersed in writings. Lots of our preachers like to write one book after another, one journal after another. You may not know this, but they say per population, the Churches of Christ have more publications than any other religious group in the world. Our preachers like to write. So he does a lot of writing for them, and they need that because there's just not too many Spanish journals or authors for the Spanish part of the Brotherhood. So he's always writing little books and so forth, and does a wonderful job. But he's the director of the program. And then Jesus Martinez is our full-time Spanish teacher. Jesus is originally from Mexico, came up to America in the 90s. You taught both of them, did you not? So Charles knows them. Jesus, his name's Jesus, but he kind of changed it to Jesse for us. Sometimes Americans, when they see Jesus Martinez, they begin to question, why is someone named Jesus? But anyhow, in their culture, there's a lot of Jesuses, as we know. So Jesus came up to us from Mexico. He was not a member of the church, and he got in trouble with the law and so forth, and was baptized into Christ. And he's a wonderful man, big personality. To know him is to love him. And he's just a great guy. He just got his citizenship, and he worked hard on that. I've heard it's pretty difficult to get your citizenship. I guess there are some tests that you have to take that most of us wouldn't pass ourselves. But whatever the case, he got his citizenship like 2 weeks before the last World Cup, you know, that soccer thing that the world is real happy about, that us Americans just kind of shrug our shoulders about. But anyhow, I went to his office right before, and I said, I got a question for you. He's like, what? I said, who are you cheering for in the World Cup, Mexico or us? And he's really smart as well, because he said, I'll let you know in a couple weeks. So anyhow, he's a great guy. And of course, he ended up cheering for America because we made it a little further than Mexico did in that situation. And then me and my wife, I guess we got acquainted with the Shepherd congregation years ago when we worked in Kuntz. We worked at the Kuntz congregation there from 07 to 14, and we'd have gospel meetings and marriage seminars and such from time to time, and some of your members would come over there, and I think that's how I got to meet some of you all. And then Brother Billingsley, of course, moving down here also. But I'm originally from Ohio. My wife's from Indiana. And we ended up in Texas because of mission work, the Chamala Mission schools and hospital. And I've been working with schools of preaching, I guess, since 1996, directing them in one shape or the other since 98. And glad, I guess, to be at Brown Trail. I was at Kuntz, and we had a great ministry going on there. I don't know, we were about 130 members, bunches of kids at the time. Charles may remember that because he went and helped them out a little bit when I left. And we would have never left had my father's health not got bad. And the elders called me one day and like, you know, you need to come and help your dad. So that's what I did. And then we buried him, and we're still there. But we did a lot of work in Tanzania as well with the mission there. We consider that home because Dad drug us there when we were kids. I'll never forget it. I was like 11 years old. We were living up in Cleveland, Ohio at the time. Go Browns. I'm sorry, you can pray for me, but go Browns. And I remember Dad walked into my bedroom when I was 11, and I was playing, you know, all sorts of ball. If it was a season, I played it, you know, basketball, football, baseball. And we were in baseball season then, and I was having a good time. He walked in the bedroom, said, we're moving to Africa. And I looked at him and I said, had fun. I'm staying right here. Well, that became home to us, and we've been in and out of Chamala ever since. And, you know, it wouldn't shock me if we end up there very soon. But I'm still very close with the work. Matter of fact, I just got a message from a friend right before we started. And we were raised in Africa, we were 3 brothers. So we did a lot of hunting when we were there. And a friend by the name of Boaz just sent me a message and told me one of our hunting buddies, Aladad, just got arrested for shooting an elephant. So Aladad's going to be in trouble. I don't know how long he'll be in prison. If he makes it to prison, things are a little different there. But anyhow, so we're in the middle of that conversation. If you see me look down at my phone, that's what's going on. But Aladad originally was from Pakistan, and his family ended up in Tanzania during World War II. And so anyhow, that's just part of growing up, isn't it? Some of your friends end up preachers, and some end up in prison because they poached an elephant. But we enjoy being at Brown Trail, and we'll be there as long as the Lord wills. Now, this is most of our instructors. We've lost a few over the years, but those that have a year behind their name, they are graduates of the school themselves. And we've lost a couple. We lost Obed Rodriguez back when COVID started. You taught Obed, did you not? Obed, it was a terrible loss. He got COVID that very first year in November, and he passed away 2 weeks later. He was only 40. His wife followed 2 weeks after that with COVID. And then his mother died the next March with COVID, and his father died the next June with COVID. And his father was the only one with the pre-existing condition. The rest were just healthy. So it's weird how that worked, and I don't know how it affected you all, but we lost my mother-in-law with it. But that was kind of a bittersweet thing because she had Alzheimer's at the time and didn't know whether she was coming or going any longer. So, one of those deals. But all of us have been affected by it one way or the other. Also, we've lost Drew Robinson recently. He taught our evangelism classes, and is a great evangelist. But a Lord's Church in Dutchess County, New York, shut their doors because of a lack of membership. And, of course, the church still owned the building. So him and his wife decided a few years ago to leave their job in Waxahachie, which is south of Dallas, to go to Dutchess County, New York, and try to revive that congregation. And they have about 40 members now within 3 years. He's baptized 15 to 20 people. Members of the church from other counties heard what was going on, and a couple left this congregation, that congregation to come and help out. And he's got that congregation standing on its feet, ready to rock and roll. So he's looking for another congregation up north that is suffering, and him and his wife plan on moving there. They were supposed to try out in Concord, New Hampshire, at a small place last week, but because of a big snowstorm, that was canceled. But he texted me this morning. I didn't really read it all, but I think he's in Connecticut this morning looking at a small congregation. So that's what he does. We're very grateful for him. He's a Texan, born and raised. So he was up there his first winter, and I called him at the end of January. Me being from Cleveland, Ohio, on the east side of the lakes, you got that lake effect snow. I know you all deal with that a lot down here. It'll get 3 to 4 feet at one time. So I called him. I'm like, well, how's New York? And he took a picture, and there was 3 or 4 foot of snow outside. He goes, I don't like it at all. But anyhow, he loves the church, and he has a missionary evangelistic mindset, and we need more men like him today in the church. So I hated to lose him, but I'm glad he's there. Now, our Spanish program, we're the only 2-year program in the United States of America right now, and it's kind of new. We've graduated 56 since it started, and our graduates are preaching in Georgia, Texas, Arkansas, Mexico, El Salvador, and Costa Rica right now. We have 8 full-time students in that program. We had 9, but 1 quit just a few months ago and went down to Houston, and we're hoping that he'll straighten out whatever needs to be straightened out and comes back to us. But we could have 100 students in this program. The issue is just finances. And we're doing better. For a few years, we were only having 2 to 3 at a time, but now we can afford 8 to 9 at a time. And I might as well go ahead and tell you, I told Eisenhower, but we had someone give us a big donation for the Spanish students of $100,000. So next year, we'll be able to bring in even more. So we're grateful for that donation. But you all know, we all know what's happened to our border over the last few years, and it doesn't really matter where we stand on the politics, they're here. And we all know that they're all not going to be rounded up and shipped back home. It's not going to happen. So they've been spread throughout all of America except for like 2 or 3 counties, and they're establishing congregations, and eventually they'll unite with our congregations. That will happen. But that first generation, where they only speak Spanish, that first generation, when things like this happen, they hardly ever unite with the other congregations. Give it a generation or two, and their kids learn English and learn the culture, that will happen then. So in the meantime, they need as many preachers as we can provide, and we cannot provide enough. And as I said, these congregations are popping up everywhere. I do a lot of traveling, as was mentioned, and it used to be, well, I'll just tell you, being from Northeast Ohio, we always thought authentic Mexican food was Taco Bell. And then we moved to Texas and realized, oh, wow, it's different, isn't it? Now you can find good Mexican food restaurants everywhere. And it doesn't matter where you're at. But we were up preaching in, I say we, but my wife's traveling with me. I do the preaching. We were in Chicago about a year and a half ago preaching. And my wife's like, I wonder if they got any Tex-Mex up here. So I Googled a place, and we ended up in the hood. And we found the place, and the next thing I knew, a cop was following me. So we pull up into this Mexican restaurant. He gets behind me, and he's like, what are you doing up here? And, I had my Texas tags, and I said, well, we're looking for a good Mexican place. And this is what he said. He goes, thanks to your governor, we have some great Mexican food restaurants in Chicago. So he was very happy, and we talked with him for 5-10 minutes about our great governor that sent, whomever up north, and he was happy, we're happy, but whatever the case, the Spanish congregations are popping up everywhere. They're growing 20, 30, 40 members, and we're doing our best to help them out. Now, we have 72 classes that are offered at Brown Trail. Meaning if you sit through all of them, which you will be in class for about 2,400 hours. That is equivalent to someone who has a master's degree. And they take every book of the Bible. I teach myself Old Testament intro and Old Testament culture. I love teaching the Old Testament culture class. The culture there in Old Testament times is very similar to the Arabic culture today, and especially tribal culture. And since I was raised in that part of the world, I have a better understanding than most Americans would. So I really enjoy teaching that. I teach 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, and all of the history classes, and Jeremiah and Lamentations and so forth. And the history classes I have fun with. I've fallen in love with restoration history. I guess what happened about 15 years ago, they needed a restoration history teacher. And they're like, well, Heath is from the Ohio Valley, so he must know something about it. Well, yes, I was raised a little bit in the Ohio Valley, but you never vacation at home. So Dad never took us to those places, but I've traveled to them, studied them, learned to love them, and I really enjoy teaching restoration history. I'm a firm believer that if we don't teach restoration history principles or restoration principles, then we're going to raise up a generation who does not know why we are what we are. And unfortunately, that's happening all over the United States today, where this new generation, they don't understand restoration principles, and it's because they haven't been taught. So I enjoy teaching those classes to these young men. We also have a Moving Towards Spiritual Maturity program, a one-year program for kids out of high school, college, who may just want to take a year off and study God's Word. And we also just added what we call the STEP program, Spiritual Training, Edification, and Preparation. And this program is online, and it is geared to kids who may be thinking about going into preaching one day. So they could take some classes at a little deeper level on Monday evenings. These classes are taught also by our newer graduates, which then gives them experience as well. So the newer graduates gets experience, these young men get experience, and decide if preaching is for them. Unfortunately, it happens from time to time. Someone will come to a school like ours, they'll study 2 years, work 6 months or a year, and realize preaching is not for me. And it's quite unfortunate when that happens because we've made such an investment. But still, in the end, if it saves their soul, if it helps them be a better deacon or a better Bible class teacher, elder one day, it's worth it. But, we're there to train preachers. So this program, along with our women's program, we have 48 students right now in all of these programs together. Now, here's some of our more recent graduates, and I know you all have supported some of these men, and I'll talk a little bit about them. I don't know if some have ever gotten down here to see you. I sure hope so, and because they're required to. But I know they send their newsletters, and I know that you get their newsletters because they are not allowed to get their check every month until they send their newsletters out. And you ask, why would we be so mean? Well, that's experience. We've learned a long time ago, if we don't make them send those letters out, some of them won't. Not because they're lazy, some may be lazy, but because they get busy with all their schoolwork as well. So we have John Paul Fallis. John Paul is originally from Costa Rica. And I don't know if John Paul ever made his way down here. Okay, well then you met him. You know his personality. And I guess about 3 years ago, the church in Keller called me, one of the elders, and they're like, we got this guy. He's a great young man, salt of the earth, blah, blah, blah. You know, I hear this stuff all the time. I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. And we want to get him there. Well, school was supposed to start in 3 weeks. So that would have meant he would need to get his passport, student visa, raise the support, all out, airline tickets, and get them here in 3 weeks, which I told him, I said, that's impossible. Well, no, it wasn't. Believe it or not, we accepted him. He had his passport and his wife's passport, their student visa, airline tickets, everything, and support in 3 weeks. It was just amazing. We've never had it work like that. So we brought him in, and, you know, I've heard about his big, loving personality, and, you know, I hear that stuff a lot with what I do, and like, yeah, we'll figure it out. And he is what they said he was. He just loves people, and people love him. But I'll never forget the first time he came up to talk to me, and you met him. He's only about yay high. But he came up to introduce himself to me, and he grabbed me by the back of my neck, pulled me down, and then he did on his tippy toes, and he kissed me on the cheek. Well, he doesn't know what a Yankee is, but I informed him real quick. We don't do those type of things where I'm from. I said, maybe these Texans do, but not us. And well, he came to me the next day to greet me again, and he started to do one of those things. And y'all remember Emmitt Smith, right? I did one of those checks right there to keep him, you know, a good yard away from me. And thank you very much. But anyhow, that's the type of man he was or is. He graduated school. He worked a year for the Lord's Church in Louisville. And now him and his wife are back in Costa Rica, where he is serving a congregation there. And then his classmate that graduated with him was Jose Mata. So John Paul was the one always smiling and laughing and carrying on, and Jose was the quiet one. He is from Mexico, and after graduation, he went back home to be a preacher at that local congregation. Also, Oscar Alas recently graduated. He's from El Salvador. He's preaching there, also attending college at the moment. And then we have Jose Espinoza and Victor Luna, and they recently graduated as well. Jose is now preaching at the church in Comanche. If you've ever been to Comanche, there's the Pearl Street congregation, and then there's a little building behind it, and the Spanish congregation worship there. And then we have Victor Luna, who graduated. He's from Cancun, and he's back at Cancun preaching there. One of the things I do from time to time is I always stop in and visit our graduates, pop in, say hello, and whatnot. And I've been trying to tell people I need to go pop in and visit him. You know, just see how he's doing. Even though he doesn't speak any English, we'll figure it out. Maybe need to go there about once a year to make sure he's doing good. But he was a good guy, and grateful that he is back in Cancun. Now, here's some of our more recent English graduates. We have Jared Hammond, who is from Mount Vernon, Texas. He's kind of a new convert. I say it that way because he was a Easter Christmas Christian, if that makes sense. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's what he was. That's how he was raised. His mother's heritage was within the churches of Christ. So on Easter and Christmas, she would drag him to worship. And well, he became an adult. He wouldn't go with her any longer, but he got married, and his wife started going with her. So his wife's like, well, there's more to it than Christmas and Easter, right? We understand that. So she started attending full time, and she was baptized into Christ. And he sat around home and watched her get up and go to worship every Sunday. And he finally was like, well, okay, I'll go with her. And he was baptized into Christ. And now he's a gospel preacher. And he's working at Mount Vernon. He's a great speaker. He's got one of those real deep bass voices. So when he speaks, it's one of those voices they talk about in Restoration history of preachers who had them. They said you can hear them 2 miles away through the hollow. And so he has one of those voices, and he's a good guy. Just had his knee operated on, and he's recovering from that. Beside him is Tyler Hill. Tyler is preaching, and I'm going to get this wrong, I assume, because we pronounce it differently where we're from. But it's either Medina or Medina around here. So that's where he preaches at. You know where I'm talking about. Whatever it is here, it's the opposite in Ohio. And I think in Medina here, y'all have a children's home, right? They have one in Medina in Ohio, children's home there. So I don't know. You didn't need to know that, but why not? I'm here. I know that, so I might as well just throw it out there to you. But he's preaching there. He's really young. He came to us at 17. So he graduated at 19, and then he worked a year under Richard Massey, who's one of our graduates from the early 80s in Weatherford. And now he's there. And then we have Andrew Patterson. By the way, he's from Hondo, or he's preaching at Hondo. And he was our resident genius. Everyone needs a resident genius, right? At 15 years old, he was accepted to go to Texas A&M. And I know Texas A&M's not Rice, it's not Harvard or Princeton, but it's still a good school, right? And he graduated with his master's at 19. So he's a little smarter than I am, maybe some others, but he wants to preach. His father's an Okie, and his mother is an Egyptian. And so that's an interesting mix there. But his desire is his master's degree is in Arabic studies. His desire is eventually to end up over there working for the State Department somewhere and being able to work with local congregations or perhaps start congregations. So that's his desire. But right now he's preaching in Hondo, and he's been there for a year and a half or so. And then Caleb Griffith, he's one of our homegrown men there at Brown Trail. And he's working with the STEP program right now, organizing it, and he's furthering his education. And then Cody Martin, he's one of our recent English graduates as well. Cody, a wonderful story, but he was raised in Dallas, and his parents, I don't know, they didn't worship anywhere. They weren't members of anything, so no faith. And he was taking a philosophy class at college, and something piqued his interest. So he showed up to the Lord's Church at Seagoville, and he got talking to the preacher, and he was baptized into Christ, and he decided to become a preacher. And he took his first preaching job in Concord, New Hampshire. And then some of our Spanish students right now, I know a couple of them have made their way down here, at least I believe so. But we have Enrique and Daniela Sanchez. Enrique was raised in the church. His wife, Daniela, was not. They're from Costa Rica, and he's already been hired to preach at a congregation when he graduates in December down there in Costa Rica. But he was baptized when he was 20, and the youth minister took him underneath his wing. And so he served as an associate and youth minister for several years. He's 31 years old. And they're just a nice young couple. They've been married 5 years as of October 20th or something like that. And they do not have any children yet. And then we have Ulises Gonzalez and his family. They're from Panama. They're at the school right now. And when he graduates, he'll go back home. But he has a master's in computer sciences. And he speaks about 3 words of English. And I speak about 3 words of Spanish, so we get along well. We get along so much that we figured out the other day how to argue about the Panama Canal. So anyhow, he's a good guy. He loves the Lord, and his daughters are having a little hard time adjusting to America, but as soon as they graduate, they'll be going back to Panama. He'll work with the Lord's church there. And then we have the Daniel Martinez family. I don't know if they've been here or not, but you all have given him some money from time to time. And as you could see, he has these 3 boys. They're from Baja, California, which I learned 2 years ago is not in California. I had to learn those things. But that's, I guess, a district just south of California, down in Mexico. And when he arrived at the school, I always asked these guys, why preaching? Why do they want to attend a school of preaching? And he gave me an answer unlike any answer I've ever received. And he said, when I was 5 years old, my father passed away. He said, my mother raised me in the church, and he said, I figured out life, and he says, I got a good, successful business and everything. He says, but it keeps me very busy. He said, I came to the school, and he says, I want to be a preacher, but he says, my main reason is to save my 3 boys. And, I've never had anyone say that to me before. And I was kind of touched by that. That was nice to hear, because there's a lot of us preachers out there who have done great things for the brotherhood over the years, but we forgot to save our boys. We forgot to save our children. And I could mention some big, big name preachers who many of you all would remember from yesterday. And then I could tell you none of their children worship right now. And it would just amaze you. And that's because a lot of us have spent a lot of time going throughout the world saving the lost, but forgetting about home. So I was very touched with what he had to say. The bigger, heavier set boy, he's the oldest one. He was recently baptized down in Houston. They went down for a door-to-door campaign. He was baptized there, and his brothers, I'm certain, one day will follow as well. And then we have Marco. Marco is from El Salvador, and he was converted while stopping in and visiting Brown Trail, and he's attending the school also. And then we have Elvin Hernandez. They're from Knoxville, Tennessee, and he works with the Spanish congregation there. And the English congregation there, they support him fully. So upon his graduation, he'll be the preacher at the Spanish congregation. Then we have Luis Diego. You can see his picture. You ever heard of this thing called the Freshman 15? Call it the Freshman 30 to 40 with him. He really likes Tex-Mex. And he's put on the weight since he's been with us. But before I tell you about him, I know I've passed this clipboard around before, and some of you get our email newsletter. But if you want to get our email newsletter, and by the way, I'll send it out tomorrow, Lord willing. I send it out once a month. You can add your email to the list, and I'll add it. But I'll start it here and pass it around, and I'll get it. But Luis is a psychologist. And he has a PhD in psychology, and he works for the government there in El Salvador. And because of his expertise, he travels a lot in South America, preaching, but not only that, but working with various governments and so forth because of his expertise and everything. But he is our class clown right now. He's never been married, no children, but he's the one, you always got to have a class clown, right? But he's in his mid-40s, and he'll be the one underneath the desk tying someone's shoestrings together. And you would think as a psychologist he would have grown up by now, but he hasn't. But anyhow, he keeps them laughing, and we're grateful for him. And he'll be going home after graduation. Now, this is most of our student body. Not all of them are in the picture right now. And by this, I mean our full-time students. The young lady, I always get asked about her, so I won't let you ask. That is Norfleet's daughter. And Norfleet is from Indiana. And she wanted to attend and take classes with her father, and she took every class for a year. And now she's in college there, taking some courses while he finishes out. But I'll talk about a few of them real quick. We have Davin Watley. He's from a preacher family. And I already told a couple of y'all about him. He was engaged to be married, And I did a presentation, and him and his fiance came. And since she was there, I took the opportunity to talk about the challenges in the presentation of being a preacher's wife. That way she would hear it. She broke up with him the next day. Decided that wasn't for her. So, she'd already had these doubts, because she knew he wants to be a preacher. So anyhow, it broke his heart. He and I have had a couple heart-to-hearts about it ever since. But hey, he's single, willing to mingle if you want to know someone that wants to be a preacher's wife. But he's already been hired. He graduates in June or May, and he's been hired by the Mount Pleasant congregation. And he is going to be a full-time evangelist for them. They already have a pulpit preacher and an associate, so he will be a full-time evangelist for them. And then beside him, you have Tanner Smith. And Tanner's a wonderful story. I love to talk about Tanner. I don't think he likes me talking about him, but anyhow, I will. Tanner is from Spokane, Washington. And he was raised on a ranch, and his parents are atheists and evolutionists. So at 15, as a sophomore, one of his running buddies gave him a Bible for Christmas. He took it home. And I don't know why, he doesn't know why, but he opened it up to the book of Matthew. I mean, there's 66 books, right? So you got 66 chances there. And he opened up to Matthew, read it that night, and started attending a local congregation and was baptized into Christ. When that happened, because of his zeal, he constantly was pestering his parents. His parents have their firm beliefs, as many do in the Pacific Northwest, against Christianity. And it put a big division between them, and he moved out. He got a certificate in welding. He did finish high school, but he got a certificate in welding and was welding all across the Northwest. And while doing that, he went to the grocery store one day, as what used to happen, and he met a young lady. And Allie is her name. And she was attending the Presbyterian College up in Spokane, double majoring in communication and Bible, preparing to be a preacher, or whatever they call them, for the Presbyterian Church. So imagine this, those two coming together. So he taught her the gospel. She obeyed the gospel. She finished her degree and her communication degree as well. They got married, and then they came down to the school of preaching, and he's already been hired to preach at a congregation in Spokane. They just bought, or they're working on buying 10 acres. That was part of the plan. I hate taking people from places in the Pacific Northwest, up north, and the Northeast without a promise of them going home, because it's hard finding preachers in Texas. It's almost impossible finding them in that part of the country now. So anyhow, he'll be going home soon. You might be able to see in the picture, he likes to lift weights. He's only about 5'6", but he's got 18.5-inch biceps. And I told him the other day that it's unscriptural to have 20-inch biceps, so he needs to stop. But he gets up every day at 4 o'clock, and he goes and he works out. And then he attends classes from 8 to 3:30, and they're ready to get home. I don't know, they're just itching to get home. They got a countdown, and him and his wife every day let everyone know what the countdown is, and he's already halfway packed. So as soon as they graduate, I doubt if they spend another night in Texas. They want to get home, and that's good. So they get back to the church there. Norfleet is a great story. He was a semi-pro boxer. He disagrees with me, by the way. He says he was a pro boxer, but his record was 1-7. So therefore, he's semi-pro. If it was 7-1, he'd be pro. But he was not raised in the church. And during his boxing days, toward the end of them, he met a member of the church who came to the gym to train. And he was soon baptized into Christ. He's about 40 years old. He's been a Christian for 7 years now. And my wife and I met him up in Fort Wayne. And he just a wonderful story. But that's something we're seeing, is about half of our student body these days are new converts. And I don't know what that says about us and preparing our young men. And I guess you all go to 45 after? No one told me otherwise. So oh, okay. Oh, at 45? Oh, right now. Okay. Well, see, you're lucky I asked, or we just keep going, right? Yeah. Now, some of our students that are going to be coming in June. In June is when we have our English intake, and January is when we have our Spanish intake. But we got JJ, I can't pronounce that, and his fiancee, JC. They're going to get married in the next few weeks before school starts. But JC O'Neill, that's Chip O'Neill's daughter, if you remember Chip. He attended Brown Trail in the mid-'90s. And so his daughter, she knows what a preacher's wife is like since her mother was one. And they'll be getting married soon. He just graduated university up in Denton. And so they'll be starting. Then William Ford from San Francisco. This is him and Kevin, our director. William and his new wife are going to be coming in May to start classes. He lives in Oakland, but he worships and works in San Francisco across the bay. If you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about because I've never been there, so I'm just regurgitating. But we'll be grateful to have him. Also, Pablo Arista is going to be starting the English program. This is another situation. His parents are immigrants, and they worshiped at Spanish congregations for the longest time, but they've learned enough English where now they worship at Brown Trail, and of course their son being raised here. And then we have David Howell, who is Chinese. He came to America for 6 months on a visitor's visa and started attending the Lord's Church, the Bridgewater congregation down in Katy. And, you know, he wasn't anything, but he just wanted to know what this church thing was about, right? So he started attending there. They baptized him into Christ, and now he's working on his student visa so he could stay a couple years and study with us. And then Anthony Blanchard from Mesquite, he's 50. This is going to be our old man group. Every class is different. So we got a 44-year-old, a 53-year-old, and a 56-year-old. And he's a cosmologist. And so he'll be attending with us as well. He was converted 6-7 years ago. And for the last 2 or 3 years, he has served as an associate minister there in Mesquite. So we'll be grateful to have him. But we're grateful for the support that you all have given to the school, specifically for the student support over the years. You know, I don't know of a better investment in the brotherhood. And the reason I say that is because these young guys, they could be preaching for another 5, 6, 7 decades. And we're investing in the future. Our earliest graduates from the 1960s, we still have 3 from the 60s that are still preaching full-time. Our very first graduate, the very first that walked across the stage, Dan Carter, he part-time preaches up in Oklahoma. And then there's another one. His name slipped my mind. But he's preaching full-time in Stephenville, outside Stephenville right now. And he's in his mid-80s. And he's been preaching at that congregation, I think it's called Oak Grove, for several years now. So you do the math. They've been preaching 6, 7 decades. And these youngsters that were graduating now, do the math. This is 2020s. They may be preaching unless the Lord comes into the 2080s to the 2090s. That's the investment we're making. We're investing now and for tomorrow. Any questions? I could talk about this all day, but if you want to get me talking all day, get me on restoration history. I might need all day and tomorrow. But anyhow, I appreciate being here with you all again and appreciate your love and support for training young men.